Hi, welcome to another Witchdoctors DIY Garage, where we show you how to do it yourself so you can save some money. What we're going to talk about today is polishing out scratches and buffing your bike and trying to get the bike to shine the best we can without swirl marks, and just show you how to do some of this. We had put a post on Facebook about a week ago and asked you guys what you were looking for. So we had a lot of people write in questions, and we wanted to get you what you're looking for. What problems are you having? So what we did was we kind of compiled a bunch of those questions, and we are going to produce this video for you to answer some of those. So the first thing we're going to talk about is sandpaper and getting some scratches out. And a little bit of background on me. I had a body shop for 20 years, and I also owned a detail shop for 20 years. So the one thing I learned, there's a bunch of ways to do this, okay? So what I show you is what works for me. It absolutely works. If you follow these steps, you can do it yourself. The one thing I caution you on is I make this look extremely easy, okay? This is not as easy as what I make it look. So when you go to do something and you want to try some of these techniques, practice them on something else first. Not the wife's car. But if you have a kid that has an old beater, take a little spot on their fender and you can do it. That way you don't goof up your bike, okay? If you have an old piece of anything painted metal, if you have something old laying around, I mean even your lawnmower, your tractor, you can do the hood on it, okay? This all works. It doesn't matter what you do it on, but you don't want to do it right on your gas tank on your first try on your bike. You don't want to do that because this is extremely hard. The other thing that's very hard to show in the camera is a lot of it is by feel, okay? And you can't show feel. So when you're feeling the part, you feel, is it smooth? Is it scratched? How rough is it? How smooth is it? When you're buffing and you're sanding, it's how much pressure you're putting. When you're sanding, you don't want to just dig right in. You want to go real easy, and I'll try to show you some of that. The same with a buffer. When you buff, you don't want to just put the power to it because you will screw everything up like that. And that stuff, a lot of times, you cannot fix without painting. Okay? So you want to go easy, and it's the pressure you put, and it's the speed of the buffer. And I'll get into all that stuff for you. But I just want to caution you to take your time when you do this kind of stuff. Okay? I make it look extremely easy. And I know in a lot of the videos you guys say that. How you did that, it looked so easy. A lot of that stuff is that easy. This is not that easy, okay? So we get back to the sandpaper here. The one thing you want to do on sandpaper, okay, there's all different grits of sandpaper, and I just have some laid out. We have 320, 600, 1000, and 1500. What sandpaper means, that grit number, that 320, 600, 1000, what that is, and it give you a little technical term, in 1 inch of the paper, 1 square inch, there's 320 little grits in there, okay? In a 600 grit, you would have, in 1 inch, you'd have 600 grits, and so on, okay? That's just a little bit of the technical stuff, but in the everyday language, the lower the number, the coarser the sandpaper, okay? And you can go clear down into like 36 grit, which is like a grinder almost, okay? You can go clear up to like 2000 grit, 2500 grit. That's almost like notebook paper, okay? So these are some common ones you use. The other thing you're going to find out is when you do sandpaper, you have wet dry sandpaper and regular sandpaper. Or I'm sorry, you have wet sandpaper and dry sandpaper. When you do your bike, you're going to want to use the wet sandpaper. Now, you cannot just take a regular piece of sandpaper from Lowe's that's a dry sandpaper and use it wet. It'll fall apart. You can't do that. You will screw everything up. You have to use wet sandpaper. Okay? Now, the wet sandpaper you can also use as dry. I know that kind of gets a little confusing. So dry sandpaper, you can only use dry. Wet dry sandpaper, and if you look on the back, right here, it says wet or dry. Okay, so the sandpaper tells you that. You can use it either way. What the water does, and you want to use water, what that does is it acts as a little bit of a lubricant when you do it, when you sand. This is so fine, if you were to sand a lot, it would clog up the sandpaper. The water keeps that from clogging up, okay? So that's kind of why you do it. That's why when you have the real fine grit, you have to use water because it'll just clog. You'll take one swipe across and the paper's clogged up. So that's the difference on the sandpaper. The other thing, be very careful. You want to buy a high quality sandpaper. If you go to Lowe's or Home Depot or Menards, one of those kind of places, and you buy that sandpaper in a pack, and it says it's 600, you have to be very careful. And I don't know the technical on this, but that type of sandpaper is different. There's different standards for sandpaper, okay? The one thing that is a standard, this letter P in front of the 600, that's a certain standard, and that kind of stuff I don't get into. I don't know, but I know that's different. So if you took a 600 sandpaper from Lowe's that was, say, the orange color that everybody's used to seeing, that is not going to sand the same as this sandpaper, okay? So you have to be extremely careful, because once you take something and you go across your bike with it, if you put the scratches too deep, you cannot get them out, okay? It's extremely hard to get them out, and that's where you got to be an expert to get that kind of stuff out if you screw it up, okay? So make sure you buy quality sandpaper. Most of the time, the better sandpaper will be this black color, okay? And you can see the difference in these grits, the 1000 and 1500. You can see the shading difference when you go from 320 to 600 to 1000 to 1500. You can see they're a little bit different colors, okay? That's just because of the way the light reflects off, because there's more grit here than there is here. Or I'm sorry, less grit. So that's something you want to do. Stay away from those orange sandpapers and yellow sandpapers and all that. Just get the black stuff, the wet dry. You really won't have any problems if you do it right. So that's a little bit on sandpaper. When I say you have to use water with that, a couple different ways you can do it. You can just take a cup, fill a cup with water. All you do, you take the sandpaper, dip it in there, and sand, okay? No big deal. When you're doing something on your bike, what I like to do, instead of having, you can use a garden hose, but you'll just have water running everywhere, or you know, with the garden sprayer, you'll just have it everywhere. I take a little bottle, you know, a little mister bottle, and when you're doing a part on your bike, you just kind of spray it with a little water and then sand it and then spray it. And when you spray it again, you rinse that junk off, because that's extremely important. When you sand it, and I'll show you on a part here, when you sand it, you're going to have all that gritty junk on there from the sandpaper and everything you're taking off, okay? You got to rinse that stuff off, or you're just going to keep grinding it in, okay? So that's very important to keep that rinsed off. The other little trick you can do is, if you have a bottle like this, put a few drops of soap in there, ivory liquid or whatever, just some soap. It gives it lubricity, so it slides a little bit easier and it sands a little bit easier, okay? It's not for cleaning or anything like that. The soap does not clean. It lubricates and makes it a little bit more slippery so you can sand. So the last thing is a sanding block. A sanding block is extremely important, because what people do is they'll take this piece of sandpaper, they'll fold it up like this, okay? And then they'll take their fingers and they'll sand like that, okay? What you're going to do, and I can do it for you, I'll show you. You're going to put grooves right in the paint, because these two fingers are pressing hard, and you're going to go like that, and you're going to put lines right in the thing, right in your part, and now it's going to be like wavy a little bit. What the sanding block does, you just put it in there, you fold your sandpaper around it, and now you have a flat surface to sand, okay? If you get one like this with the two layers, one is hard and one is very soft and squishy. The squishy side is better on curves, okay? Because when you sand a curve, you want to make this kind of conform around it a little bit. If not, you'll take the paint right off. So on an edge, you'll take the paint right off instantly, like that, very quickly, if you're using a 320 or a 600. So you have to be very careful of that type of stuff. So a sanding block is important, and the other thing this doubles as is a squeegee. So when you have your water on there, you squeegee it off and you can see right what you're doing, and you keep sanding, okay? Now, one thing that I always get questions about is, my wife went to clean my bike, my son went to clean my car, and they used a Brillo pad to clean it. Obviously, I know you guys are all saying, I had that happen. I know somebody that had that happen. We used to get that in a detail shop all the time. This is called a scuff pad. This is what a lot of people find. This is like a bodywork body shop type of thing, but it's called a scuff pad. You get these in different grits as well. You do not want to use this, no matter what. You do not want to use this to buff and polish out scratches, okay? SOS pad, steel wool. I don't care if it's the 4/0 steel wool super fine. You will screw everything up. So if you have something like this and you think, hey, this is pretty smooth, do not use it, okay? You will screw stuff up, and I'll show you that on the part here in a second. So now I kind of explained everything sandpaper-wise, the do's and don'ts, a little bit of the technology about it. Let's get down to kind of showing you some of this. So what I have is an old saddlebag lid, okay? Some of the first things you're going to want to do is you want to determine, hey, I have some scratches on here. And you can see we have some different marks on here. There's a mark here. There's some scratches here. Hopefully the camera will pick these scratches up for you. Down here, we have a little bit more common, like what you guys would get, some scratches like this. One rule of thumb, and it's a very accurate rule of thumb. If you can drag your fingernail across the scratch and you can feel it, like right there, you can catch, I don't know if you can see that, but I'm catching in that scratch. You cannot fix that, okay? Now, if you just barely catch, you can probably fix that, but with some extreme skills, okay? If you catch your fingernail and you bang and you catch it, you can't fix it. Don't even try to sand and buff or to buff that scratch out. You're not going to fix it. That needs repaired with paint. That would be a touch-up, you know, touch the scratch up, and we'll get into that, or a repaint the whole part, okay? We're talking light scratches. We're talking scratches from when you got on the bike, maybe your jacket ran across it, or you used a rough towel or something. That's what we're talking type scratches. So let me just show you some of these sanding techniques. I'll show you what this pad does. Okay, so hopefully in the light here, and I'll just do this very light so you can see it. That's just that light, and you can see how we just totally scratched that part up. Okay, that can't come out with your finger. It's in there. It was that quick, okay? That is something we can buff out. Okay? So what I'm going to do for you is we're going to work in an area here, and I'm going to show you. So let's just say that your bike is all messed up with scratches. I feel like I'm doing an infomercial here. Okay? So let's say you have those scratches. Now, these will buff out. But let's say we take something and we get some deeper scratches. Okay? We get some scratches in there that are pretty good. Now those will still buff out, but they're going to be a lot harder to do. Okay, and then let me move back here, and let's take a scratch. I'm just going to take a nail. Let's put a scratch in there, okay? Let's put one going this way. Put another one, okay? Those scratches are all in there. Now, I can't feel them with my fingernail, but they're much deeper than what that pad did, okay? So when you do sandpaper, you want to start out with the smoothest grit you can. Now, let me go back one step and say, you only use sandpaper when the scratches are deep and they will not buff out, okay? This right here will probably buff out. So we don't want to sand this yet, okay? Because we can buff that out. What we're going to do here is we're going to do this deeper. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to try to make a little bit deeper of a line without going too bad, okay? Can you hear that? That's too deep. But we're going to try to get that one out anyway. So what we're going to do with the sandpaper, we want to start out with the smoothest grit we can. Now, just from experience, we don't want to use 1500 on that. 1500, you're going to be there all day, okay? So we're going to take some 600. Now, one thing I'm going to show you here is, like I said, let me tear this. Remember how I said if you take 2 fingers, you're going to sand this and you're going to put a line? Let me try to do this if I can. You can just get some water on it. Okay, you don't need a lot. Okay, there's just one sand across there. Our little squeegee block, we're going to squeegee that off. Okay? Can you see those 2 lines that I just put on there? That's what you're going to do. Okay, that's what you don't want to do. So if you take your block you put it in your block and you wet that up, okay? And you go like that. And one thing I want you to notice, you see the white? That's clear. The bike has clear on it. You're actually taking off that first little layer of clear. If you ever see the color, if you see black, red, blue, whatever, you have now just ruined your bike. You've gone through that protective clear coat and you're down into the color. You can't do it. It's time to repaint the bike, okay? No ifs, ands, or buts about it. You cannot fix that. So then you would just take that and you can see it, rinse it off. The one thing that helps, and depending on how big the part is, you want to go in an X. You want to sand in the one direction and then come back and sand in the other direction. That will make sure you get stuff level, okay? So you go this way, and I'm barely pushing. I'm just letting barely doing it at all, okay? And you see, it's just wet. If you want to see what you're doing and where you're at, take your block and squeegee it off, okay? Squeegee it off. And it'll dry. It's a little cold in here, so it's going to take a second. But now you can see those scratches are out. It's dull and it's even, but the scratch is gone, okay? So that was with some 600. So now what I would do, I would go with my 1000 grit. And now you work your way up, because a buffer really won't take out 600. You want to get it as smooth as you possibly can, okay? So now we're going to jump up to 1000. And I push a little less hard. And you can feel it. When you're going here, you can feel this. I'll try to do this. I don't know if you can hear it or not, but you can actually hear the difference. You can hear when the sandpaper's cutting, and then you can hear when it's sliding. Okay? So it's a little smoother now. Now, you could buff out 1000 grit scratches. You could do that very easily. What we want to do is we want to go a little bit farther. We want to go with 1500. Okay? Now, keep in mind, each time you're doing this, and you see that white, that clear, you're taking clear off. So you don't want to push as hard. Okay? Because you don't want to keep doing this. This is one of these things. More is not better. Once your scratch is out, then you're done. You don't want to keep going. And see, I go in an X. Okay? And I'm just barely pushing. Okay? So now, that right there is ready to buff. Okay? So, now that we showed you some of that type of stuff, we're going to get the buffer out. I'm going to explain to you the different buffing pads. I'm going to explain the different compounds you use, because there's a ton of different things you can do. Okay? I'm going to show you kind of the steps. You can tweak it as you need from there. Some of these steps on your bike, you may not have a deep scratch. You don't sand at all, so you don't even have to do that. So you might come in this video partway through and say, well, I need to start with a polishing. I don't need to start with the sanding, okay? I'm just trying to show you everything start to finish. So we'll come back and we will do the buffing part. So when it comes to buffing, there's a million ways to do it. We have some of the buffing pads here. Colors, different brands of compound, different grit of compound, different brands of pads. There's all kind of different buffers. You get confused on everything. We're going to show you how to simplify some of that stuff and what you need for what you're doing. Some of this stuff is made for, like they say, professional use only. You'll never use this in a million years on your bike, okay? I'll show you some of that just so you know it, but you won't really need to do it. You don't need to spend a lot of money. A lot of this stuff you can get at Harbor Freight and save a ton of money over some of these type bigger brand name type stuff that you won't ever use, okay? And the features you will never need in a million years. Okay, so the first thing we want to talk about is, people say, what's the difference between buffing, polishing, waxing, all that? Buffing is actually getting big scratches out, okay? That's like the heavy duty part. That's where you do the meat and potatoes. You start and you buff something, okay? If your bike has some light scratches on it and you buff it, you will make it worse. Okay, absolutely guaranteed. You will make 10 times more work for yourself. Okay, buffing is kind of the term everybody uses, though. It's kind of like Kleenex for a tissue. Okay, buffing is what everybody says. In the retail world, that's fine, but when you're doing this and you go in a body shop or you go into a store that sells paint and buffing supplies and you say you want something buffing, you're going to get buffing. You need polishing or you need waxing. That's where most of you guys will be. Okay, so the one first thing when they say a buffing pad, okay, these are all basically buffing pads. They're just different grit, like the sandpaper was. A wool pad is what most people are used to seeing, okay? The wool pad will cut the quickest. This is the meat and potatoes, heavy cut they call it, okay? This will cut right down and go right through your paint if you don't know what you're doing very quickly, okay? This is something you probably want to stay away from. We'll show you how to use it, but for most of you guys, you will not use this, okay? This is the same thing as this. It's just a yellow pad, okay? It's a little bit finer. And in buffing pads, you have that same, how coarse they are, just like the sandpaper. So you have to be very careful. Okay, try to get where you can see this little chart. When you buy a buffing pad, on the back here, it tells you what different pads are good for. So you can see compounding, buffing, applying wax, removing wax, polishing, and swirl eliminator. Okay, pads are different. If you use this white pad that I just showed you to put wax, you'll scratch everything to death. You'll ruin your paint. Okay, so you can't do that. And then this little chart, when you look, it tells you this pad, you know, just like anything. X in the box means buffing. This yellow foam is for buffing. This is a 4-ply wool. That's what this one is. So this is compounding and buffing. Again, like I said, this is pretty coarse. Okay. You wouldn't really use this type of stuff for what you guys are doing. This would be if you painted the whole bike and then you sanded and buffed it out from scratch, from a fresh paint job. This is where you'd kind of start with that type of stuff. Okay, so that's those pads. We get into these other pads here, and you can see most of the stuff they kind of color coordinate. You know, all the yellows are the same. Not always, but it's usually pretty close. Again, on the back of the pad, it'll tell you heavy duty is black, medium cut yellow, light cut, soft polish, and fine finish. Okay, so there's, in this brand, it will tell you what it is, and you have to keep brand for brand. If you mix this brand with somebody else's brand, the numbers may not be the same, so be careful. And sometimes, that's why I say they try to go with the colors, but not always. Okay, you have to try to stay with the same brand. So that this is the yellow one, this is the green one, this is a used green one, obviously. Okay, it's beat up. Now the one thing, when your pad, this still looks like it's good. Okay, and in a body shop setting where you were going to do more steps, this pad would be okay. For polishing on a motorcycle, this pad is ruined. Okay, all these gouges in here, that will make scratches on your bike. And you guys you wrote in about swirl marks. This is the kind of stuff that puts swirl marks in. Okay, you have to have a nice smooth finish. When it's like this, you're going to start making more work for yourself. A lot of people don't know that. Okay, also this pad's dirty. Your pads have to be clean. If you take a pad out of the box like this and start buffing your bike, whatever dirt, grit, whatever from the last job that's in here is going to be put right on your bike, and you're going to screw stuff up. You have a huge potential to make a mess. Okay, one thing I want to say is each pad is matched. You want to match a certain compound. So if you have a, say, medium cut pad, you want to use a medium cut compound with this pad only. Okay, if you take a finish pad and you put medium cut compound in your finish pad, you now have a nice soft pad with grit compound, and you're going to scratch your bike all up. You have to keep them in the same steps, or you are going to make problems. So organization is key to this stuff. Don't go mixing stuff around or you're going to have a mess. Okay? So these are just a couple, these are called the foam pads. These are just a couple different ones of that. Now these pads are also foam pads, but they're called waffle pads. Okay? And you can see the texture. It looks like a waffle. Okay? What this does is this helps eliminate swirls. Okay? Swirls are just exactly what they sound, circles. When that buffer's spinning and you put it on there, you're putting swirls in the paint. You automatically are doing it. You can't help but do it. This type of a pad, since it has the humps, it's not flat, it helps polish the swirls out as this spins. So this makes swirls much less, okay? Big difference in this. Then you go down to the finish pad, and you can't feel them. This is really soft. This is super soft, okay? And you can see the waffle pattern is much tighter. You have way more in there. That's a swirl eliminator, okay? That's what gets the swirls out of your paint, okay? So this would be a final step with a polishing type thing. The other ones were like buffing pads. These are like polishing type pads, okay? I don't know if it says in here. Yeah, if you look on the back, it says foam polishing pad, okay? So these things all tell you, not sure what this one says. This one also says foam polishing pad, okay? Now the one difference you'll notice is this says ultra fine. This one does not. This just says foam. So this is the next step. Okay, and like I said earlier with the sandpaper, keep going smoother and smoother. So ultra fine is smoother than fine. So that's just that. Now, those pads that I just showed you, those pads are for the big polisher type buffer. Okay, and you can get the heavy duty buffer one, and you can get a polisher one that's not so heavy duty. That's what those pads are for. They also make smaller pads. Okay, these smaller pads are the same thing, but they don't tell you, you know, the grit or the texture of the pad. But again, yellow, we know that's fairly rough. You can feel it compared to the black is fairly smooth. Okay, these are just smaller, and I'll show you that tool. And then you can go clear down to a little mini air one. You can get the wool type pad. This is the soft wool type pad. You can get the waffle yellow type pad, and you can get it on a hand one. This works good for very, very small scratches. I want to say if you have one scratch on your motorcycle, this may work for you, okay? This is very, very delicate type stuff. The other pads are a little bit better, and I'll show you the one, the medium, the dual action polisher. I'll show you that one in a minute. But it just kind of shows you how there's a whole bunch of different pads, there's different buffers, there's different polishers, but that kind of defines for you what some of this stuff means. You always want to try to start out with the finest first, and you'll learn that just through experience. If you take a super fine one and you're going at it and nothing's happening, you got to come back and go a little bit coarser and try that. And then once you see some change, then you can work with that and then go back to the fine one again. Okay, so it's just a little bit of trial and error until you start learning what to do. The next step, I'll hopefully show you some of that with actually the buffers, how they work with these pads, and then we'll buff that part that we started out with the scratches. So now we're going to show you the buffers and the compound, that those pads, how you use them. Okay, so the one thing, when you have the pads, that wool pad, it's really hard to keep it clean. Once you're buffing it, professionally, and this is not something you'd ever really need, but they make something called a buffing wheel spur. When this is on there and it's spinning, you hold that on there and it cleans your buffing wheel. Screwdriver works the same. It doesn't work the same, but it works, okay? The foam pads, you don't want to use something like this or a screwdriver to keep them clean. You'll ruin them. Okay, so I just wanted to show you that real quick. So the first buffer that most everybody's used to is something like this, buffer polisher. Okay, this is a heavy duty. This, in my opinion, is way overkill for a motorcycle. It's extremely heavy. You can get the cheap models, you know, the Harbor Freight ones, they're a lot lighter, but you can't get in all the angles. The pads themselves are too big. You figure on your fender, that's probably as wide or wider than your fender of your bike. You have no control over anything. You can't get in the fine tune it and the little nooks and crannies. You can't do it with something like this. It has its place, but for most of what you're going to be doing, you wouldn't do this. Again, the pad on here, that's something you can get different. A lot of the pads come with the old nut that goes on here. You do not want to use that kind of a pad with that nut, especially when you're starting out. If you don't know what you're doing, you have a big nut spinning in here, you're buffing your part, you hit the nut down in there, and now you have just ruined the paint, okay? So you want to get, this is called a Velcro back. and this is, you know, the opposites. So you put that on there like that, and now it's stuck, and when you want it off, you peel it off, okay? That's pretty much what everything's switching to. All these pads that you buy, they come Velcro. You can't even put a nut on this stuff anymore. So if you have one of the older buffers with the nut style, get rid of it. You can buy just this pad itself, okay? I don't know if I can get this off, but they just unscrew. There's usually a nut somewhere here that you, when you do it, you lock that nut down and then unscrew it, okay? So that's how that comes off. You can buy this pad by itself, okay? So that's those pads. Now, the polisher buffer that I recommend is one like this. Now, this looks like an angle grinder. It is not, okay? This is a special buffer. It's called a dual action buffer. Again, it has the Velcro back on there, okay? One thing that's pretty important, these ones don't really do it. They don't really have the thing, but you want to line this up as best to center as you can. Some of the wool pads, the bigger pads, they actually have a piece that you put in, that you line stuff up. You want to get this, see how I have a little bit of white here and a lot of white here? It's not in the center. If it's off center like that, you can risk putting swirl marks in, okay? So you want to get that as close as you can. Now, what this is, again, this is one made by Tip brand. Harbor Freight makes one almost identical. This one's variable speed, so you can turn this screw right here and get your speed. On the back, it tells you your chart. Now, if you remember originally I showed you that one buffing pad, these all are made to go with a certain speed. The faster is not better, okay? So you spin this super fast and you're going at it, that is not better. You have to match the speed of the polisher to the speed of the pad to the speed of the compound. It all has to match. If you do that, you will have phenomenal results. You can do it the other way, believe me. I don't change speed, I'll be honest. I know how to do it and I don't change speeds. I use one speed and I do everything, okay? But to tell you how to do it, you can't do that. That's a lot of experience that I can do that. So the pads are that, and again, different pads. Now, what this does when it runs, dual action means it spins like this in a circle, but it also spins like this. So, and I'll try to show you when we plug it in. This kind of spins like elliptical. That helps with swirl marks. Swirl marks is kind of one of those terms that everybody looks at their bike in the sun and they see scratches everywhere. And they say, well, my bike's got swirl marks. No, your bike has scratches. If you look at a car, generally it's easier to see on a car. When you look at a car and you see the sun hit it in a certain way, you'll see circles going all the way down the car. That usually is seen in a car that's freshly detailed or a car that's freshly painted, okay? That's when you see that the most. I know some of you guys have probably bought a car off the used car lot. It looks perfect. You get it home, it looks gorgeous, shiny, smooth. You give it 2 weeks and you see swirl marks everywhere and you're like, what the hell happened? That thing looked great. I'll tell you what happened. It's a detail trick. What happens is, and we'll move into these compounds next, okay? What happens is, they make all these different compounds, and there's as many manufacturers and brands and types of compounds out there, you could go crazy. Okay, a couple I have. Here's the Victory Scuff and Swirl and Polish Remover. This is obviously wax, hand glaze, and we'll go over each one of these. But the ones that I like are Meguiar's. You can buy these at most part stores, so you guys can find the stuff very easily. But what happens is, you start out with a coarse compound, like I said. You buff the car, you make it look really good. Then you slowly work your way down, finer and finer and finer, okay? What happens is when you get done in the detailing world, because they have to do it quick, and you have to do it as cheaply as you can for a car dealership. That's what car dealerships are based on, okay? So they do them that way. What happens is they use something called hand glaze, fill and glaze, swirl glaze. There's a million different ways. What that is, and that's this stuff, okay? This is actually a very high quality one, but the lesser quality ones out there, what this does, and the reason it's called, this one says hand glaze, but there's ones called, it's the same thing, fill and glaze. If you can picture the surface of the paint under a microscope, you have micro scratches in there. That's the polishing marks from the pad and all that. This fill and glaze fills those scratches in. So when you fill those scratches in at kind of like that microscopic level, the car shines beautifully. It looks great. It's awesome. What happens is, a couple weeks later, after it gets rained on and weathered on, all that washes out of those scratches. So when it washes out, now you see the swirl marks that nobody actually got out of there the right way. They just filled them in to get the car off the lot. Okay? That's the same thing a lot of you guys will do, where you'll take something like this and you'll just put it on your bike and you'll say, God, I did an awesome job, it looks great. A couple weeks later, you're back and you say there's swirl marks everywhere. It's because you didn't get them out in the first place. You took something and made a band-aid out of it. You filled those scratches in and yeah, it looked great, but you didn't do anything else to protect them. That's where a good wax comes in, okay? Now, if you have to get the scratches out as best you can and so that they don't come back. The wax goes over top and puts that seal protectant layer over the fill and glaze and keeps it in there a little bit longer. Thing with waxes is, a lot of people in marketing on the infomercials, they say 1 time a year wax. That's crap. You can't do that. Wax has to be about 90 days, give or take, in most situations, most climates. If you're a saltwater climate, you have to do it more, okay? You have to keep that wax on there and keep that layer of protection on there to keep that paint underneath looking good. A good wax does not protect it from like scratches and stuff. If you kick your boot on it, wax isn't going to help you. What it does help is when you get bug guts and stuff, it helps since it has that layer of protection. Those bug guts don't eat into the paint and they will wash off quicker when you wash your bike. Okay, so that's what wax does. It gives you that protection, but it's not permanent. You have to do it every couple months. You have to put that on there. If you do that, your bike will stay much shinier, much better. So a lot of people complain about Victory paint. Yeah, it's a little bit soft, like they say, but it's how people take care of it is the main reason. People take an old rag they find out of the wash machine and wash their bike. Well, you just ruined it. You're going to put scratches in there, and if you don't know how to get them out, that's what it is. So getting back to these polishes, these buffing compounds and that, Meguiar's has a really cool system. On the front of it, they have this little gauge, okay? So this product is all the way up top. It says extra heavy cut, okay? This is a heavy duty compound. Again, it says ultra cut compound. Don't worry about all these numbers because you'll get confused. Ultra cut means heavy duty cut. This would be used with the wool pad. So this is like your super heavy duty. Wool pad with something like this, okay? If you ever get lost, and I know guys, I don't do it, but there is something called directions on bottles. Read the directions and it'll give you something. I know none of us do that, but they are there and that's why they're there. Okay, so the next one, if you look at these gauges on the bottle, okay, we have heavy, medium, and fine. Okay, so you would start out with the heavy, then you would come around and you would use the medium. Now this would be, say, that green pad or maybe the yellow pad, depending. That's where something like this would come into play. Okay, the fine would be the black waffle pad. That's where something like this would come into play with that black waffle pad. And again, going finer as we go. The last step would be something like this hand glaze. That would be that blue waffle pad, that really fine one. That would be something like this. The other thing with this, you can do this by hand. That's why it's called hand. You can also use a machine, but you can do it by hand. I recommend the machine just because it's a little bit easier. One thing you absolutely want to keep in mind, none of this, you do not do any of this in the sunlight. The bike has to be nice and cool. You don't want it to pull it in from outside and the tank's 100 degrees and start doing this. You don't want to do that. Let it be nice and cool. All these products, if you let them sit on the bike, if you put it on there and then you buff it on and it's drying and you go in and you come out the next morning, you're going to have one hell of a time getting stuff off. Don't let it do that. Get it all off. Once it dries, it becomes like cement. The other thing, the hand glaze. Once this dries, you almost have to buff it to get it off. It's that hard. That's one reason I don't really like this product for that, but it's a phenomenal product and will make your bike look awesome. If you have a black bike, a lot of the companies make polishes and this hand glaze type stuff for black bikes. So look for that when you're out shopping. Other colors, not so much, but black, especially because it's so hard with swirls and scratches, they make polishes just for your bike or for your color. So that's something to keep in mind. If you can buff anything on your bike and you can take that part off of the bike, like that saddlebag lid, take it off. I know it takes an extra time, okay? What's going to happen is when you buff this stuff makes a lot of dust, okay? And it does something called sling. When you start that buffer, if you don't do it right, you'll sling that compound all over the place, okay? When that stuff hits your engine and gets in your engine fins, it's virtually impossible to get off. You will scrub forever to get that stuff off. So if you have to do parts on your bike, tape off as much as you can. Put plastic, newspaper, blankets, whatever you can, cover up everything. So when that dust is flying around, you don't get that all over everything. So that's very important. If you can take the part off, do that, and then your bike will stay clean, because there's nothing worse than getting it all nice and shiny and then you got stuff in all the nooks and crannies. And I know you guys have seen that. You'll see wax around door handles on cars, wax around the window trim. You don't want to have that stuff. That does a terrible job. So that's a little bit about compounds. Any brand you buy, try to stick with the same brand because it's made to work together, but it'll always tell you what to do on the bottle. And again, just think fine, working your way back. Don't start with the most coarse. Start at the finest and pick what you have. And through a little bit of experience, you'll see what works best for you. So let's get into buffing some parts now. We'll get back to that saddlebag lid and we'll show you how all what we've shown you now kind of comes together. So let's get down to what everybody wants to do. They want to get in there, run that buffer, and see how to do this. So that's what we're going to do. One thing we got to talk about is safety. You want to wear some safety glasses? I do not. So I'm just got to tell you guys you need to wear safety glasses. One thing, you can see how trashed I am just from doing this, and haven't even buffed yet. One thing, good idea, apron, okay? You want to make sure you don't have any belt buckles, because if you lean over, you're buffing and you hit your gas tank, hit your saddlebag, something like that, you don't want to scratch anything. So a nice apron without any buckles and everything on it, keep you clean, and it keeps your bike protected. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to buff this part that we sanded, okay? So one thing I want to show you about factory paint, and everybody says how smooth their bike is. If you can see this in the light right here, you see this texture, this light and dark spots? That's the texture of the paint, the factory paint. Now I'm not saying it's bad, but that's what it is. Your bike is not smooth. We just made it smoother by sanding this out with that X pattern. That's why this is all uniform and this has all that bumpy texture. If this was really bad, this would be called orange peel. So if you've ever heard of orange peel, it would be this, but a lot worse. So this is a good factory finish. It's just we can make it better, okay? So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to use this wool pad. And like I said, most of you guys won't do this, but we're going to use the wool pad and the compound, okay? So you can either put the compound on the pad or on the part. I like to put it on the part, okay? Now, you don't need a whole lot, okay? And I'm going to show you what will happen if you buff too hard with this, okay? Now, the one thing, people will get this spinning and they go like that. When you do that, that's going to fling compound everywhere. The other thing is a lot of these buffers have what they call slow start or anti-sling start. When you squeeze the trigger, it starts slow and then works its way up, okay? So what I do is I just hit this a little bit and just kind of get it smeared around in there, okay, like that. Now, it's still going to sling out a little bit, but it's not going to be so bad. So with pressure, and I only use this half of the buffer, okay, and you'll learn that when you're doing it. If you go this way, it's going to catch the part, and that's one of those things, like I said in the beginning, I just can't teach you that. You just have to try it. One other thing is, on edges, any edge, okay, here, this curve edge, when you're learning, you will take the paint off because you're going to be going like this and you're going to be looking right here and you're not even going to pay attention over here. You're going to take the paint right off. So what I always recommend is take some masking tape. Put a piece of masking tape right on that edge and now you won't burn it. It's that simple little trick will save your edges. So wherever you have an edge, put something like that. So let me show you here. And I'm pushing and I'm looking right here. This is the spot I'm watching. Okay, and that's where I'm pushing. So you can see that quick how that came shiny. Now, if you can see in the light, it's pretty shiny right here, but as we go out, it's not as shiny, okay? We need more compound. Without any compound, you can't buff. You're doing nothing. You need that compound in there. The compound works through heat and pressure. So at the kind of the microscopic level here, that's what that's doing. It's cutting the part, or cutting the paint, okay? So now you can see that doesn't look too bad for a coarse, you know, just doing it coarse. That's pretty good. You have something called DOI, which is depth of image. And I'll try to show you that a little bit later, but what you do, you hold a tape measure on here, okay? And you read the reflection in the paint, how far the numbers you can read. If you can read the numbers clear at say 10, your depth of image is 10, okay? That's something, an old car trick, old show car trick, to check how good the quality of the shine of the paint was depth of image, okay? So you can play with stuff. You can try your car and get it in the right angle and see how far you can read before it starts getting blurry, okay? So one thing I'm going to show you here now, we're buffing, we're not paying attention. Let me show you how quick this happens. Okay? Now what we just did, we just melted this down here. This is melted. That's ruined. This is compound that'll come off. This is melted. I just burned the edge. Now, if you don't do it too bad, you can sand it and you can buff it and do just like a scratch. But that's melted right down into the plastic. So that quick with one of those pads, you can take that stuff off. It takes that quick and you're done. Okay? So, now that we have that, let me get this crap off of here a little bit. Okay, so that is with the wool pad. Now if we want to try the yellow pad, we just Velcro it off. Now one thing I'm not doing here, I guess I can, I like to get these pads wet. I dunk them in a bucket first and get them wet. Now I'm not going to do that because I don't have a bucket here, but I'm going to soak it up a little bit. It just helps with lubricating the pad a little bit. The one thing you want to do is once you put this in a bucket and get it wet, when you put it on here, do not start this like this. You will drown yourself. Put it down in the bucket a little bit and spin it, or put it in the garbage can and spin it so all the water flies out, okay? Okay, so that just gets it off. Make sure if you have a variable speed, again, it tells you the different speed, what the number means. So number 3 equals about 1500 RPM. So you want to match that to your compound speed. Okay, so we're going to speed it up a little bit. So we're going to take the medium compound. We're going to go. And I'm going to show you up in this spot that we didn't buff yet. This will actually work on that. So that's why you don't really need to do that wool pad. See, I get it going, smear it around. All the compound is in the pad now. And it's just even, smooth pressure back and forth. Okay? And you can feel it'll start grabbing. When this thing, you can see it start chattering, like right there, it's grabbing. That's because you don't have enough compound. You need to put some more compound because it's not lubricated anymore, it's grabbing. Sorry, I just slinged it everywhere because I forgot. So I'll go up into this. a little bit. And I'm doing this a lot faster just for time in the video than it would take you. You would go over this, and once you get the scratches out, you're done. Don't keep going, because then you're going to cut into that clear coat. See it grabbing now? I need more compound. So one thing you'll see is it's starting to get, you can see we started polishing up in here a little bit. So if I worked a little harder on that, we would get that out. Okay? So I'll put some more up here and I'll show you, we'll get that right out. Start it slow. Now that one scratch that I said we wouldn't be able to get out, you can really see it right there. You can see the compound catching in it. That's that scratch that buffing will not get out. I'll try right here. I'll push really hard and try to get that out. And you can see it will not come out. Okay. It's not going to come out with just buffing. That's where you're going to have to sand. So if you have those deep scratches that your fingernail catches, and now down here, if you look, you can see that burn spot a little bit better. You can see where that's melted right there. It's a little easier to see now that I got it clean. Okay, so that's pretty shiny. So now we're going to take our waffle pad. I'm going to put the compound. Now waffle pad generally speeds up a little bit. The polishing, you generally speed it up a little bit. But keep in mind, once it's spinning faster, you hit an edge, you're going to burn it right off twice as fast. Okay? So you just kind of keep going and get that polished out. And again, wet the pad first, soak it up, and then, you know, let it spin out. You can start to see it's getting smoother and smoother, it's shinier and shinier. So the last one we're going to do is the hand glaze, but I'm going to use this waffle pad on it. Oh, that's way too much. You only need a little bit, half of that. And I'm going to slow the speed down a little bit. And I'm just going to buff that in. You want to make sure you get it in all the spots. Don't miss anything. Now the one thing when you do it with this, it's a little bit easier to get off. Once it dries, you can get it off because you're actually doing it with the buffer. And you can see there's a little haze on there. Okay, see that haze? Once that haze dries, then we can get that off. So we'll come back once that's dry. So this is pretty dry now. So you want to use a microfiber towel and use a brand new one, okay? One thing people do, like I said earlier, they take stuff out of the wash machine because they used it a million times to wash the car and wash the dog and everything else. Don't do that. You will ruin what you just cleaned. Make sure you use a clean microfiber towel on this, okay? Use it only for this. When you wash it only by themselves, okay? And for what these things cost, I would throw them away and use another one. Because you get gravel in this, and then you go wiping your bike, you'll put all the scratches in, and then you're gonna say, my bike's all scratched, the paint's terrible. No, the paint's good. You put the scratches in, okay? So you're going to do that. And now you want to protect that. I use ice wax. I'm trying to think. Turtle wax, ice wax, liquid wax. This is a pretty good wax. Make sure you shake it up. I just use the little applicator here. Just put it on. I mean, everybody I think knows how to wax. Okay, by this point, make sure you get it on there. Again, read the directions. Do not do this in the sunlight. Okay, let that dry. Now, while that dries, one thing I want to show you, because somebody had written in about an orbital polisher. They're like, they want to buff with an orbital polisher. This is an orbital polisher, so I know a lot of you guys have that. This will basically do nothing for you on your bike. This, you can get all the pads and the buffing pads and all that. It doesn't spin fast enough, nor does it have enough pressure to do what we just did. This, in my opinion, is to apply wax on a car and take wax off. That's it. It's too big to run on your bike. Wax your bike by hand. So to answer your question about can you use this to do the job, my opinion is you cannot. You will struggle forever and you will not get the results you're looking for. Okay, so that's fairly dry. It's pretty quick there, I know, but so you can see now, and you would use a different rag to take the wax off. Okay, same microfiber towel. And one thing with microfiber towels, this tag right here on there will scratch your paint. Okay, so if you're not paying attention and you're like this and you're doing it, you will scratch your paint. So make sure you tear that tag off, or always hold on to it when you're doing the other stuff. So hopefully in the light that we have here, you can see how that's pretty shiny. You can see a pretty good reflection in there, just doing it that quick. So if you took your time and did all these techniques and worked at it, you would get those scratches out with no problem. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to spin this around. We're going to do this other side that we worked on earlier, but I'm going to show you with this other buffer. Now this one is that dual action one. This is much easier to use on your bike. So you're going to do the same thing. You're going to start out with your heavy duty compound with the pad. Now these, I'm not sure if you can even get a wool pad for this. You might be able to, but I'm not sure. Now this takes much longer to do because it's not a heavy duty, but you won't screw stuff up as much. You can see how much longer this compound's lasting, and I put probably less than I did on the other one. Now this is a little harder to see what you're doing because of the compound, but we're just going to work that area. I'm pushing fairly hard, okay? And you won't screw the paint up. You can see it didn't even burn the compound off. I can go right on that edge and push pretty hard, and it doesn't do anything. Okay, so that's why I say this is much more forgiving, but it does take a little bit longer. So we'll clean that off, and we'll kind of see where we were here. So you can see those marks are coming out a little bit. Now, one thing I didn't say is the cord is real important. When you're doing your bike and this cord's banging into your saddlebag, you're going to have a mess, okay? You always want to kind of throw the cord over your shoulder so that it's not dragging. So when you're working, the cord isn't hitting the parts. That's real important. You can hear when I'm pushing hard and I'm letting off, okay? So I have like medium pressure. But again with this, it's really hard to screw it up. So let's see what we got. So you can see it's coming. It's getting there. Okay? Now, the little scratches that are in there, you still got to work a lot harder with this. If you had the wool, you could hit that real quick and they'd be out of there. Okay, so that's just the experience of if you have that, you can do that right there and knock those scratches out, and then come back with this and do that. So I'm going to hit those real quick with that wool buffer. You'll see. Okay, now I know it's kind of hard to see, but those scratches are all gone now. And it was that quick. So just kind of bouncing back and forth, showing you how to do this. We could be here all day with a video with this thing, but just kind of showing you. So now what this is doing, this is still buffing, but it's kind of getting some of those swirl marks out. We're starting at the ground level of getting the swirl marks out. Okay, so you would continue to do that until everything looks nice and even and smooth, which it's really not too bad. So once you did that, you come back with the softer one. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to show you something here. We use the medium compound, and I'm going to put a swirl line on here. Okay? It's going to show you how this spins. When I said this is that dual action, you'll see how it spins. So watch. Can you see it going in a circle? This will spin this way, but it also spins this way when it's doing it. Now you would just do this until you get all your a little bit finer. So you would continue with that. And hopefully you can see that the scratches are getting a lot better and a lot smoother. And then we're going to take some of this hand glaze, because you would take the next pad and go smoother, but I'll show you with hand glaze, you can do it by hand. Okay, so we're going to put it on by hand like that. And we're going to let that dry, and we'll come back and take that off. So this hand glaze is dry now. So this stuff, like I said, is really hard to get off once it dries. That's why I like the buffing way to do it. But you get that off there, and you can see all that scratches is out of there, and we didn't even wax it yet. So now, like I said, we'll come with a little wax and put that protectant on there. And we'll let that dry. Okay, so now while that's drying, hopefully we've showed you that this is a pretty challenging job. This is not for the beginner, okay? We kind of went through this very quickly. Now you would have hours in doing this, okay? I know I went through those steps really quick, but you can see it's time consuming. You have to be very careful with what you're doing, but you can do it. Again, practice this on something else. Practice this on your lawnmower. Practice this on your kid's car. Whatever. So you got an old beater, try it on that first. You might like it and you can do your whole car and make it look new, like a detailed job. But on your bike, follow those steps I gave you and you shouldn't have any problems. Again, those buffers, you can get them at Harbor Freight. That dual action one, it's only about 50 or 60 bucks, so you're not talking a lot of money to do this. And you can use it on other stuff too. You can wax the car with it. You don't just have to buff with that thing. So you can see how these scratches come out. This will not give you any swirl marks, okay, if you follow those steps and you use that little waffle pad. I know on that dual action sander, I kind of blew through that real quick because I showed you it with the big buffer. But you can get that little waffle pad for that little dual action. You would finish with that step right before that hand glaze, or you could put it on, you could put the hand glaze on with that. So real important, keep your towels changed. I know we have a bunch of purple ones. It looks like I'm using the same one, but you know, once that wax dries, you can take that off there. You'll feel this is like glass once you do it. So stay off the edges when you're sanding. Don't sand the edges. If you aren't careful, put some tape over the edges. That'll save you the trouble. And your bike should come out looking like glass when you're done. A lot of times what happens is the spot you fix looks better than the factory part. So then you're like, well, what's going on? Well, now you just created a monster because you did too good of a job and you got to go fix the factory part. But once you do this and you maintain it, like I said, with some wax, every couple months your bike should stay looking like glass, looking like new, and give you a lot of enjoyment over the years. So thanks for watching.